Hi all. I don't know if you remember or you haven't checked out the tips video I did. There were 5 key major tips, and in that tips video I said about strategic crush being a top tip. So things like based on pawn structure, like getting a big knight on d5 if there was a gaping weakness on d5, or you can have passed pawns, connected passed pawns. So these things can be considered sometimes strategically crushing or strategically winning. You can have a strategically winning game if, say, you have got a better bishop than the opponent. The opponent's bishop's a really bad piece. You can aim for strategic advantages, and that's the foundation for positional chess. And you can evaluate positions kind of in terms of the abstract, the higher level elements of the position. But so that approach to chess, strategic positional chess, can be contrasted with this idea that actually in chess, no general rules or principles apply. In fact, a visual observation of elements could be, like too general play rather than specific play, which the specific details of the position dictate that it might be more important, instead of going for a big knight on d5, to go for a kingside attack or win material. So the specific details of the position, if we had infinite powers like engines, computer chess engines, we really just want to play the position rather than maybe strategic crush. So I want to investigate really the major differences since the last FIDE tournament. I was maybe subconsciously overnight thinking about the games, and I've reached a new conclusion that actually maybe when we think about strategic crush or positional advantages, we're trying to make the position basically in effect easier to play for ourselves. If we get a big knight on d5, the position often is easier to play, or a big passed pawn, and you're often intuitively generating winning chances as well. But the key thing is easier to play. Now when you're focusing on the exact details of the position, that often involves detailed calculation based on the tiniest of finesses sometimes in the position. And I think actually the way chess computers work, they're always chasing the idea of playing the position, and never a more relaxed approach of trying to make the position easier to play. And a recent chessbase article, I want to illustrate that with, or try to illustrate the idea with this game, that engines, computers, are about playing the position. So as white, Allwermann, who is claimed, there's strong evidence he did kind of there's allegedly cheat in this tournament. He was playing a 2-5-0-5 grandmaster, I believe, Kalinitschev, Sergey Kalinitchev, in the Boeblingen Open of 1999. So he kicked off with e4, and we have the start of the Sveshnikov Sicilian, but no, Kalashnikov with e5 instead of knight f6 immediately, which sort of prompts knight c3, but instead e5. So after knight b5 d6, white is not obliged here now to play knight c3. Instead c4 is played. So Allwermann is using some version suspected of Fritz in this tournament at the time, and Fritz was one of the dominant engines in 1999. So basically the play from white is all about play the position, and even when white's winning, it's still about play the position rather than this idea of trying to make the position easier to play. So let's say, for the sake of argument, for our new theory, that strategic crush equates for trying to make the position easier to play, and playing the position is playing the position in its full blast glory of the tiniest details, playing on those, entering as many complications as needed as the position dictates, even if you're winning, completely winning, because engines don't care. They will just be ruthless all the time. So that's what I want to get out of this game example with you today, to start off this subject, this comparison of the two approaches. So at the moment, okay, white's got this kind of Maroczy bind on d5. So bishop e3. He's got some developmental issues though. This knight needs to be developed somewhere. Actually, it's about to go somewhere potentially useful, a3, because maybe later it can reroute to c2 to e3 and then highlight d5 and f5. So knight d7, queen d2 seemed logical, and you know, positional as well. Okay, f5 tries to get a bit of dynamism going, bit of counterplay. So it was taken, and now we have bishop f3. So white seems to be in control still of the position, but black has generated some potential, you know, counterplay. You can imagine, you know, possibilities like bishop c2 and rook f3 need to be factored in now. As a demonstration, black's got f-file pressure. So king h8 was played, okay, which highlights even more actually the counterplay opportunities, because now there's no bishop d5 as a Zwischenzug after the king is tucked away. Bishop d5 is played anyway, so it's not actually a tactical vulnerability anyway now. Queen e8, as though there's going to be an onslaught on the king side. Okay, black's given up d5, but he's got active pieces. He's trying to make use of that. Rook ad1, and the queen switches over. Seemingly, you know, visually it looks powerful on g6. Battery on c2, maybe some threats like bishop h3, of course pinning g2. Now calmly the move knight a3 is played, and now black tries to get more pieces in to the attack. He plays e4, which is afforded of course by this battery to support a pawn on e4, which means now e5 is ready for a knight to jump in to create, you know, maybe, you know, what we would consider dangerous looking threats. But here white is not afraid to use this opportunity of e4 to undermine black with f3 and potentially share that f-file. So after e takes, we have bishop takes. So white now is sharing the f-file, and still with a bind on d5, still in control of the position it seems. But black seems to be getting, maybe you could argue, a little bit more active after knight e5. This knight's now quite menacing, surely. Knight d5, offering the bishop actually on f3. Okay, bishop h4. So really, knight takes f3 looks potentially attractive, especially in conjunction with bishop e4 now. And if rook f2 is not available because of this move cutting across this diagonal quite usefully, is this starting to look dangerous for white? Well, Allwermann, maybe with the help of Fritz, does not care about his king too much. He plays knight f4, inviting knight takes f3. He's attacking the queen anyway. So queen e8, and the knight just jumps back. Computers also don't care about repetition type moves. They're playing the exact position. They have no compassion for where pieces were earlier in the game. They're not writing a novel which you try and avoid repetition. It's not for the sake of entertainment that this story is being written of the game. So the knight can go back to and fro any number of times, I guess trying to avoid though a threefold repetition rule. So the knight goes back to d5 here. In this particular position, if that's the best move, that's the best move. The idea of playing the position. So knight e6 is not to do with nostalgia or anything, or storytelling. So rook df1, okay, putting pressure on f5. The queen protects, so black's moving pieces back to where the pieces were. Okay, but black is getting tied down now. b3 seems to be a quite stabilizing move. After rook f7, isn't black comfortably doubling rooks, maybe with the idea of a later bishop move like bishop e4. But knight c2 now, taking this opportunity with the exact finesses of the position, that bishop c2 is now impossible because of rook takes f7. Before, the knight was protecting f8, so you know, bishop c2 would have been possible. Okay, but now surely it's dangerous here anyway because of knight g5. No, bishop takes g5. Bishop takes g5, attacking the queen. But in this move, an exact move to counter-attack and to keep the bishop pinned, queen f2. Okay, well the bishop was pinned anyway, so queen f2, even with the two rooks. But still, there's a lot of pressure now on f5. And black is actually offering up the exchange now with bishop takes c2. So the reason is that rook af8, I think, is failing here tactically. So I think the GM is already a bit annoyed here that rook af8 is because white's been sharing the F file, has got a menacing threat of knight d4, and I'll just show that to you. So in the game, bishop takes c2, losing the exchange. So after bishop f6, black was then exchanged out. But if he did try and do something about this, so we're going to add a bit to here. So rook a f8, you see it's all in white's favour. So knight d4 is a crushing move here. What can black do? If let's say well, bishop e6 fells, not to rook takes f7, when maybe black can live another day with an equal position, because he's protecting f7 and attacking the queen. But no, in this position, the exact killing tactic would be knight takes e6, inviting rook takes f3, and not recapturing an f3, but playing knight takes f8, unfortunately attacking the queen with check. So it's absolutely crushing. So this is probably what the GM saw, and he felt he had to, the best bet was just to sack the exchange now. So it's already gone downhill now for black, the exchange down. So this is the case where, you know, normally, especially in human being games, if you have the advantage, the idea of entering more and more complications, which is sort of related to playing the position, playing all the finesses in the position, sometimes it becomes less desirable than trying to make the position easier to play. Because if you're winning, you're winning. You don't have to play the absolute strongest moves in the position after. It's like, you know, a football game where, you know, if it's the last 2 minutes and one side is 2-0 up, then they don't need to try and play the absolute best football to try and score another goal. They can play defensively and just try and ride it out until the game ends. So simple chess, when you're winning, is like riding it out to the end of the game. You've got the advantage. You don't have to enter more and more complications. So we're saying strategic crush could relate to simple chess, which could relate to making the position easier to play. So let's go on that theory. It's just a new theory I'm been toying around. So here, I just thought this was an interesting game because white, computer assisted, doesn't care about entering more and more complications. And there were moves here, simple moves perhaps, which don't lose outright tactically. Well, not yet. Perhaps rook takes b7 is possible. There's no tactical threat of bishop d4 unless there was a bishop here, where bishop d4 would be a decoy to mate on g2. But that's not the case. So I think in this position there's a variety of winning approaches. But white, who's suspected to be Fritz assisted, now comes up, leaving the rook hanging with queen at a7. Okay, so that can't be taken as queen a8. That can't be taken as rook f8. So in fact, rook g8 was played, so the rook's still attacked. And now queen takes b7, so not content with the simple rook b7, no, instead of battering out on g7, an immediate threat actually of knight takes f6, and maybe something nasty on h7 potentially. But at the moment, that's not on. Bishop e4, okay, there's a threat of mate now. And white parries it by attacking the queen and defending g2, so knight f4. Queen moves. Now queen d7, attacking the queen again, queen e5. Now the king moves. And now g5 from the 2505 GM. So h7 is protected here by that bishop on h7. Okay. Now, in the notes on the excellent chessbase site, it says actually, I think incorrectly, that most humans would now play knight h5. Now I think this is incorrect actually. It says, you know, Fritz and Allwermann not bothered with such timid strategies. But actually there's a point that actually knight h5 here would invite a forced draw here. There's a forced draw available to black, it seems, if we turn on our engine friend just to prove that, with bishop takes g2. And you see the evaluation goes to 0 because there's a perpetual check here. There's no escape of this perpetual check. So actually that would have been a bad mistake, even by human standards, maybe to allow this bishop takes g2. So So what was played was a very accurate move, and does show actually that you can't just take it easy with simple looking moves, even when you are winning the exchange up. That actually you still need precision. If black, it has got pieces, the opponent has got pieces pointed at your king, ready to sacrifice themselves, even for a perpetual check. So actually, this next move is precise and good. Knight h3, because it avoids this perpetual check scenario. It doesn't work here anymore. So black plays now g4, and it looks scary. Again, knight f2. And then this is the key thing, which is much more convincing from the point of view of this argument, that as humans we want to make the position easier to play. Computers don't care, they just enter more and more complications. It's all brute force, it's all calculated. And yeah, if we could play like computers, we'd all raise our ratings, I'm pretty sure. But the thing is, we haven't got the calculation capability. We have to rely on intuition, we have to rely on general principles, we have to try and make the positions easier. And things like Nimzovich, my system, maybe you could regard a lot of Nimzovichian principles as ways simply of making positions easier to play. If you have a rook on the 7th, it's easier to mop up pawns and restrict the opponent's king. If you have a blockade, it's easier not to worry about continual pawn mobility issues. If you have control of the centre, it's easier to sort of get your pieces to attack on the queen side or king side. These are all about making the positions easier to play. So the question I have to you guys on YouTube, boys and girls, is strategic crush. Are we really saying the approach of strategic crush is drastically different from the approach of playing the position with its full blast of finesses and details, in that primarily one objective is often to make the position easier to play as human beings, because we don't want to navigate loads and loads of complications. Now here in this position we've got pressure on h7, white has pressure on h7, and a simple move which I think I'm more convinced by here, although g3 does look like a dangerous threat as well to factor in, which would actually put pressure on g2, but maybe it's possible to play other moves than what was played. But an engine is ruthless, so maybe it was possible to play queen b7 without being mated, but g3 does look a bit scary, I have to say. What would one do after g3? Say queen b7, g3, it looks scary. I'm not going to turn on an engine just to show you, just to show this position. g3, what do you do here? If knight h3, there's bishop takes h3, and you could collapse with g2 winning the rook. And if h2, then again your king's getting exposed, and it's starting to look a bit precarious, although g2 is protected. Maybe this is still okay. In fact, what would be the evaluation on this position? The evaluation is still better for white. But what was played in the game, I think a lot of engines would agree on the same clinical move here. Playing to the exact finesses of the position, actually wipe out the g-pawn. It does wipe out the danger associated with g3s anyway. Knight takes g4 is the strongest move, and that's the move that was played. Even entering more complications it seems, but it's attacking the black queen in response to the white queen being attacked. And the chess-based notes here say, nerves are still maybe silicon. Cross your heart, if there's a move you would play 2 moves before the time control, the overall tournament victory depending on the outcome of the game. Okay, but it is a bit scary to face g3 anyway, so wiping out the g-pawn is also kind of reassuring in its own right anyway, to wipe out the g-pawn instead of allowing g3. So knight takes g4, and the GM, okay, maybe he's really annoyed at this now. So what's happening here is bishop takes g4 allows mating 1 with rook takes h7, that would be mate. What about rook takes g4? There's probably queen takes f5, I guess. Because this knight takes g4 has unveiled a threat on f5. Queen takes f5, there's no back row issues. Let's just make sure of that. So bishop takes g4, we're saying mate in 1. And we're saying rook takes g4. I think queen takes f5. But actually an even stronger move playing the position is just rook f8 with a mate in 5. But queen f5 will do there, as I mentioned. So let's turn that off for a sec. So knight takes g4, yes, it's a clinical move. And I guess for the absolute best chess, you're faced with a concrete position. So playing the position ultimately rules. But often, especially in club matches or when we're tired after work, we often rely on positional principles because we want to make positions easier to play. But here, yeah, knight takes g4 actually does, in a way, make the position easier to play because it removes the danger of g3. Okay, bishop e4. Now pointing again at the king. So we've got this potentially dangerous situation, bishop and rook coordinating on g2. So white now just mops black up. Doesn't mind about bishop takes g2 here. He just plays rook 7 takes f6. Okay. Bishop takes g2 is now desperate because after king takes g2, queen e4 check, the king just neatly tucks on h3. Which, by the way, could have been a decisive move, one of my recent 15-minute games where someone could have played king h3. Here the engine's got no qualms about unusual looking moves. Oh, this move looks unusual. It fits in the nuances of the position. It totally wins, because where is the win for black? White is just clearly, materially winning. And here, the Grandmaster resigned. Now, Allwermann, you might be wondering, what was the evidence for engine use? Well, after the game, he said... he couldn't resist mentioning that the final position was actually a mate in 8 to his Grandmaster opponent. The Grandmaster replied, "I don't think so," says Kalinitschev. And Allwermann says, "Check it out, you'll find I'm right," replied Allwermann with a wry smile. And that's when suspicion started, because, this guy out of the blue, he had, sort of rating performances of less than, I think, 2,000 mostly, or 2,100, and all of a sudden he's playing like over 2,500 rating performance in this tournament. And so, these comments made after the game raised suspicions about Allwermann. I'll give you the link to the article on the chessbase site. It's a history of computer cheating. But actually, I really wanted to illustrate something, though, about how computers work. Once, when I asked the Cobian, the secret, to chess, sort of jokingly, he said basically play the position. And actually, I'm not really sure that is. I think as humans, there's always a balance, really, between play the position and making the position easier to play. I think that's the fundamental balance. One has certain risks associated with it. If you're trying to make the position easier to play and follow positional principles, the advantages is, if there's a hole in your analysis, you're still left with a good position. The disadvantage, you're playing less accurately, you're missing opportunities, you're not playing to the full strength afforded by the position, the resources in the position. And sometimes you're even wiping out tactical dangers, like this game showed. It was just, they were all erased systematically by clinical play. All of black's counterplay completely extinguished, starting with white sharing the F-file. All the seemingly dangerous active pieces in counterplay that a Sveshnikov or a Kolesnikov might in theory promise to the dynamic attacking player, all of those hopes and dreams squashed by clinical play. So when you're playing a player in general that plays the position, that is able to work hard at the board, spend half an hour on moves in FIDE time controls, you should be worried, really, because they're going to use all the finesses of the position and they're going to throw that against your generic play, which might be based on pawn structure or general general reasoning. So we've kind of got a parallel debate between Kotov's approach about candidate move theory versus general moves, and that's why some of the rationale in his Think Like the Grandmaster book was about that, about how he was disgusted by his own play on general principles. But really, I think the two are very important. We can't calculate accurately all the time, and we do have to play on general terms a lot of the time. And the benefit of creating pass pawns or big knights or better looking pawn structures is not just superficial, for looking good. It often does make the position easier to play, and it often does ensure the win anyway in most cases. But sometimes clinical play is very, very useful, as this game shows, for extinguishing counterplay, extinguishing threats, and winning games in such a manner where there was no chance really given to the opponent. Especially if one side does have structural weaknesses, the other is trying to generate dynamic tactical compensation. Clinical play is going to just overrun, sometimes the quest for dynamic counterplay generation, and here, unfortunately, it ended up losing the exchange by force now. After this move, with the triple battery on f5, the poor bishop couldn't move back, and black is now faced with the menace of knight d4 without bishop e6 being possible because of knight takes e6 and knight f8. So he ends up going the exchange down, but I'm thinking maybe he can still generate some threats. But now more clinical play from white, and you know, white's basically you know, is playing the right moves not to allow the perpetual check with knight h5, knight h3, so bishop g2 is not as effectual, and now hotting things up even more. After this move, g3 here, there's more simple knight e4 and rook f6, by the way. But now, instead of moving the queen, clinical move again, knight takes g4, removing any potential threats of g3. Okay, so clinical play, like a computer, maybe if we were perfect calculators like an engine, we'd look at every position for all the finesses. Maybe strategic crush doesn't exist. Maybe it's for lazy people. But people have, you know, often we have limited time constraints, and we want to put the opponent under pressure without too much risk. And often we're winning games like in a football match. So why should we, as humans, always try and play the position? Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.